What do a Cybertruck and something seemingly as trifling as a pencil have in common? Two things. One, they're both likely about to become more expensive. And two, you couldn't possibly manufacture them on your own if you wanted to. Like me, you probably don't care if the Cybertruck gets more expensive soon. You couldn't afford it anyway. Am I right? But here's Milton Friedman, world-renowned Nobel Prize-winning economist, to explain that second point about manufacturing.
There's not a single person in the world who could make this pencil. Remarkable statement. The wood from which it's made, for all I know, comes from a tree that was cut down in the state of Washington. This black center, I'm not sure where it comes from, but I think it comes from some mines in South America. This red top up here, the eraser, bit of rubber, probably comes from Malaya, where the rubber tree isn't even native. It was imported from South America by some businessmen with the help of the British government. This brass ferrule, I haven't the slightest idea where it came from.
Brass ferrule today would actually come from places like China or Mozambique. There's also the paint used in coating the entire thing, which today would probably come from places like Kazakhstan or Estonia. It's a whole lot of little contributions from people who don't know each other, thousands of miles across the globe, to make something that they don't care about or don't even know they're making. Yet while no central character guides this elaborate economic choreography, it still gets done and delivered to you at a cheap price. But what happens if one, or even all of the parts involved in the creation of this pencil gets eliminated? Yep, it becomes way more expensive to manufacture said pencil. That, boys and girls, is exactly what's about to happen. Not just to the Cybertruck and pencil, to everything.
But we know the prices are still too high.
Why is fast food getting so expensive?
Groceries are still expensive.
Groceries, rent, transportation, yes.
Everything is more expensive.
Total inflation under Biden under 3 years is around 17%.
Like there's something that's wrong with the economy, something fundamentally broken around.
To understand why everything might soon become even more expensive, you need to understand precisely how things get made today. A number of factors over the course of history, especially after the First and Second World Wars, have made it possible for international trade and manufacturing to become as efficient as it currently is. It's so efficient, for example, that the cost of a banana, a fruit that's known to be imported into the US, because it grows only in these regions, is often cheaper than homegrown fruits like apples and oranges. We could consider three major factors as responsible for the capable international trade systems today: transportation, information and technology, and policies. And starting with transportation, approximately 90% of global trade is done by shipping. Shipping has been known to be faster and cheaper than transportation across land, and even with the advent of cargo planes, shipping by sea is still way cheaper. Maritime vessels have evolved from longboats and other ancient types of ships to the monstrosities we have cruising the waves today. Container ships typically carry two types of ISO standardized shipping containers: 20 and 40-foot long metal containers that are usually 8 feet wide. Before the advent of these containers in 1956 by Malcolm McLean, offloading cargo at ports used to take days and make the journey of a containerized ship last many months more than it would today. This single invention increased the efficiency of moving cargo, reducing shipping times by about 84% and reducing costs by at least 35%. Specialized containers like reefers make it possible to refrigerate and transport perishable products, like your bananas, from South America to the USA at a reasonable cost. Next, we have information and technology. And well, this one is very easy to explain. I mean, like you just saw, even the massive improvements in containerized shipping are examples of advancements in technology. And combined with high-level information today, companies save excesses that would normally be accounted for by capital. Take Amazon, for example. The company is the largest online retailer, with a revenue of around $500 billion in 2021 and 2022. It's also the largest internet company. Amazon uses sophisticated data analytics to make predictions about what goods or services will be required at various locations. This unified forecasting algorithm, for example, helped Amazon to quickly respond to unforeseen demand signals for toilet paper. This use of information and technology by companies like Amazon, Alibaba, and Company makes it easier for the streamlined process of products being shipped to fulfillment centers from where they are, then sorted and sent to customers. Seriously, the journey from fulfillment centers to you is just unbelievable. Finally, and by no means the least important, policies may well be considered the oil that keeps the gears of the international trade turning. From the dollar as a global currency to GATT, we've come a long way in making political decisions that have made even enemy countries trade seamlessly with each other. It starts with the very reason for global trade itself. One society has something that another needs, and vice versa. The trick is they both need to find a way to exchange those goods and services without raping and pillaging one another. First of all, they need to be able to have a medium of exchange, aka money, that they both agree is valid for said trade. Secondly, each party needs to join collaborative trade agreements and also create policies of their own that will attract foreign investment and trade. In modern history, one of the most fundamental agreements was the Bretton Woods system. You see, since we use money in this era of human history, for international trade to occur, there has to be convertibility of one currency to another between trading countries. This was what, just after the Second World War, world leaders were thinking about when they came up with the Bretton Woods system. Involved countries were required to basically agree to the convertibility of their currency to within 1% of fixed parity rates to the dollar, which was then based on the gold standard itself. To monitor exchange rates, lend reserve currency to countries, and more, this system required a referee of sorts, which came in the form of the International Monetary Fund. These guys also knew that for international trade to blossom and upturn the economic downturn ushered in after the Second World War, they had to make it cheaper to trade with each other. On the 30th of October 1947, they came up with a legal agreement called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT, that aimed to remove trade barriers such as quotas and tariffs. GATT was the predecessor to the World Trade Organization, which replaced it on the 1st of January 1995. And it succeeded in reducing tariffs from about 22% in 47 to about 5% in 95 for member countries. When the 80s rolled around, China wanted a piece of the cake too, and made a policy of their own to this effect. They made what we call Special Economic Zones, or SEZs, in the coastal cities by implementing preferential tax incentives, simplified customs and administrative procedures, and a host of other things to make these zones a hotbed of international trade and investment, especially in their rich labor market. In more recent times, Middle Eastern states like Dubai and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia have also established SEZs and free trade zones to replicate the same growth that China has seen since then. Great. So, since the middle of the 20th century, international trade has gotten its world rocked by awesome advances in technology, transportation, and policies. The result has been progress, relative peace, and the ease and ready availability of cheap goods that have traveled all over the world before getting to us. We've gone from sending stuff in barrels using longboats and other ancient sea vessels across oceans at so much cost to what we have today. And guess what? With the ever-sure trend of technological improvement, this is the worst the system is ever going to be. What could possibly go wrong? So, before I explain why everything may be moving towards more expensive products and less cooperation amongst countries in international trade, let's answer one question that's probably been on your mind all this while. Why? Why is there a need for countries to have to trade both goods like bananas and services like labor in such an intensely convoluted supply chain that requires several systems to make it work? Well, if you remember, we already established the whole purpose of international trade to be based on the fact that different communities may specialize in a certain type of good or service and therefore trade with other communities for their own specialized products. Now, taking it a step further, the price system in the free market determines that companies will therefore do anything to make sure that they can produce the best version of a product at the best or lowest possible price in comparison with what's in the market. Corporations will spread out their operations across several countries. Manufacturing, mining, you name it, they'll utilize the value chains in different regions of the world to be on par with the competition in the market, and we, the consumers, benefit in the end. But for several years now, something different has begun happening. One that you can probably remember vividly is 2020. Yes, the COVID-19 pandemic.
Incident, one of several at Australia.
Believe it or not, this pandemic hit a lot of companies hard in the pocket. There are varying opinions on how the worldwide event actually affected the global economy, but it's clear that no manufacturing was immune to its effects. For example, in a 2022 resurgence of COVID-19 cases in China, Tesla saw a manufacturing slowdown at its Shanghai factory coincide with the lowest closing price of its stocks on the market for years. If you think that's bad, well, check this out. Just after the pandemic began, both hours worked and consequently manufacturing output saw a respective 38% second quarter and 43% annual decline. Figures which are comparable only to the time when the burst in international trade that we previously described first began, after World War II. This is unsurprising, of course, since our products travel so far to and from so many places and value chains across the supply chain to finally get to us. The introduction of something severing that ease of transportation was bound to have the effects on the supply chain that it had. And now that we are aware of this potential danger, there's an unease that's requiring many governments and corporations to rethink how they want to do international trade, or if they even want to do it at all. Period. Another type of world event that has encouraged this perceived shift of trade policies from globalization toward protectionism is, you guessed it, geopolitical conflict. And it's funny too, because many people thought that globalization, through the increased amount of free trade policies after the world wars in the 20th century, would foster global unity, and it kind of did. For a while, until it didn't, and instead became a tool of war itself. Take the Russian invasion of Ukraine, for example. Russia was hit with many sanctions that limited goods and services that it had probably been dependent on. In return, Russia cut down the gas supply to the European Union. This, of course, spiked gas and energy prices. Why? Because oil is traded globally. And even though Russia is not a big supplier to countries like the US, less supply in the global market means less supply to meet the available market. In other words, European and Asian countries had to scramble from the same taps that the United States was getting theirs, aka Saudi Arabia. Mind you, these figurative taps had already reduced production, since the COVID-19 pandemic absolutely destroyed the price of oil. Ah yes, it was a shit show. And good, honest, hard-working folk like you and I had to pay some extra dollars and euros for electricity to watch it all unfold. There's even a more sinister example of political tension threatening to kill globalization. You've probably already seen it a million times online that China and the US are having a bit of a side-eye moment. For the millionth time, paranoid Uncle Sam thinks someone else on the global stage wants to do bad things to him. And to be fair, China has kind of given enough reason for anyone to be suspicious. First, they've been accused of giving zero ducks about intellectual property, even by countries besides the United States. In fact,
according to the FBI, China's vast hacking program is the world's largest, and they have stolen more Americans' personal and business data than every other nation combined.
The man on screen is Christopher Asher Wray, the director of the FBI, and he's been sounding the alarm on China's alleged illegal economic practices for years now. And the facts seem to back him up. Stay with me. There's a bipartisan initiative in the US called the Commission on the Theft of American Intellectual Property, also known as the IP Commission. They've released reports since 2013 providing updates on the problem of IP theft. Their 2017 report estimated that the United States loses about $225 to $600 billion annually in the form of pirated software, pirated tangible goods, and, most intensively, trade secret thefts. For perspective, the report claims that about 1 to 3% of the country's annual GDP is lost in the form of these trade secret thefts to US firms. According to Christopher Wray, it's
a Chinese theft on a scale so massive that it represents one of the largest transfers of wealth in human history.
Remarkable statement. Not at all. Think of it this way. If American firms spend a lot on R&D and China steals information from the firms, then they have the advantage of being able to price the same goods on the market at a much lower price than their American counterparts. This dumping price makes it very difficult for US firms to compete with Chinese prices. Losses like this explain why the 2017 IP Commission report is filled with ridiculous figures, and it's touted as one of the reasons why the US-China trade war kicked off in 2018. The United States under Trump imposed heavy tariffs on Chinese exports as a way to get back at China. And China, seeing these as protectionist practices, played a few anti-globalization trade cards of their own. And although there have been some attempts at settling over the years, nothing has changed much. The Trump tariffs, for example, have remained under Biden. And what's worse, Trump has confirmed that he would implement even steeper tariffs on Chinese imports if re-elected. In addition to these tensions, there's also the threat that China poses to Taiwan and the world at large, with its continued moves suggesting the impending invasion of the semiconductor manufacturing giant. That's a whole video on its own, I promise you. It's all crazy. Really crazy, I tell you. And it's the reason why the US has been strengthening regional and bilateral trade agreements with neighboring countries like Mexico, Canada, and others. And what's more, the United States has also been looking to bring a lot of manufacturing back home. You see, canon events like the pandemic, illegal trade practices by competitors, and simmering geopolitical conflicts have made everyone think of the best ways to protect their investments and wealth. All of these, inevitably, may lead to the loss of linkages across value chains that were once global. Ergo, more expensive products, and in some cases, no products at all.